it plays a huge role in correcting mistakes. So it's where we learn from mistakes. And this is so, so important, especially for adults, because we don't like to make mistakes. We like to just feel like we can do everything perfectly the first time. But whenever we can like wobble in a balance, for example, that really lights up the cerebellum. And so the cerebellum is sending messages to other areas of the brain like, hey, can we do this differently next time? Like that wasn't quite right. And the same thing with coordination. So doing like several complex movements at once, you're probably going to make mistakes the first few times. That's awesome. That means the cerebellum is going like, that wasn't quite right. Let's change it next time.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson, and this is the ALWELLCO Podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space.
Adell, it's awesome to have you on the ALWELLCO Podcast. Before we
It's an
dive
honor to
into
be
your...
here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to have you. Before we dive into your perspective, can you start by sharing with our audience how we met, how you were maybe brought into the ALWELLCO community?
Yeah, sure. I think it goes back to Andy and our mutual connection with Vivo Barefoot, really. I can't actually remember the details of where it actually began, but I think Andy's connection with Vivo and my interest in what Vivo kind of represents brought us together, and then it was through that I got introduced to the ALWELLCO community.
Awesome. Yeah, Vivo is a good one for a lot of folks with, barefoot and movement and functional movement. And I know we're going to talk a lot today about yoga and your perspective. So before we get into all of those things, would you mind sharing the moment or moments that led you to become who you are today, to become this international yoga teacher and movement expert?
Ooh, that's quite a question. Well, it's a weird one because it's not like that was ever my intention. It's never something that I thought of my path being. I had kind of spent my 20s, I graduated like right before the big recession, finished with a master's degree in creative writing, which, isn't exactly what employers are looking for. And kind of spent my 20s like just doing a bunch of part-time jobs and not really having much of a direction that I was going in. And eventually in my late 20s, I found yoga. And about a year or two later, my whole life kind of imploded, where I was dumped and kicked out of my house by my landlord and made redundant in my job, like all in the span of about a month. And a friend of mine was like, well, you love yoga. Why don't you go do a yoga teacher training? And I thought, well, I don't want to be a teacher, but I don't know what else I'm going to do with my life. So I went and did that. And then people kept asking me to teach them things. And that was kind of when Instagram was sort of taking off and everybody was joining Instagram as well. And I was just posting there just as a way to kind of connect with people. And it was a creative outlet more than anything else. And I think it was just a combination of those things, like, my Instagram kind of getting more and more followers and me being really obsessed with yoga because it did kind of come to my life at a time when I really needed it. So it was like so many people who practice yoga, it was like I saw it and still do as this integral part of my everyday life. As soon as it was there, it was like, there's no way this cannot be in my life anymore. And then because I was living in a foreign country, basically, and where I had been dumped and made redundant and everything, it just kind of made sense. Well, I see all these other yoga teachers on Instagram teaching yoga in like hot, sunny places. Why am I still living in the UK? And so I sold all my stuff or got rid of it, donated it, threw it away, whatever, and lived out of a suitcase for a couple of years. And I just hustled. I just basically like put myself out there, and I like a little bit of it is kind of just good old fashioned marketing. Like I put in my Instagram bio, international yoga teacher. that didn't mean that I was like super experienced or like in demand, but I was teaching internationally. But it's one of those things like I put that in my Instagram bio, so it made me sound, I guess, like,
So Dale, let me just back up a little bit there. You
yeah.
talked about you went and did a yoga certification. Was that in the UK?
No, sorry, that was in India.
That was in India. Okay, great. So I don't know a lot, and I don't know if a lot of our listeners know a lot about yoga certifications, but where do you go? Who's the best certification? Who would you recommend if I wanted to become a certified yoga instructor? What would I do?
Oh, that's a whole discussion because in my opinion, and I know a lot of yoga teachers share my opinion, it's a kind of messed up situation because in order to be qualified to teach yoga, you only need a 200-hour certificate, and 200 hours of training is just not enough to cover everything that really needs to be known. And I know a lot of studios do it differently, where if you want to teach there, you have to train there, and then you kind of work as like an apprentice almost before you can like start to actually teach your own classes. But the way that I did it was the way that a lot of people did it, where I did this 4-week intensive training, did all my 200 hours within 4 weeks, and wasn't able to retain it all, wasn't able to take it all in because just all the circumstances. And then you're qualified to go and tell people what to do with their bodies, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. And I think for me personally, because of my growing Instagram account and so many people around the world asking me for advice, I felt a lot of the responsibility of that and didn't want to disappoint people or let people down or say something that was wrong or whatever. And so I was always very motivated to keep training like outside of the yoga teacher trainings, but do more trainings in movement, fitness, health, whatever it was, in order to feel more and more confident about how I could show up as a yoga teacher, not just, sharing like the yoga philosophy, but also giving people cues that were helpful to them.
So your advice is, go do yoga certification, but that's just the
Yeah.
basis. Go and take other fitness qualifications.
Absolutely.
Go learn kinesiology, human movement.
Yes.
Go learn other things so that you can become more of an expert. Okay, awesome.
That is my advice, yes.
Yeah.
Adell, when you were getting started, did the neuro aspect or the psychology aspect influence your approach to yoga and movement in the beginning, or was this something that was brought in later?
Not the neuro. Psychology, yes, because I did my degree in psychology and I've always loved psychology. And even after I finished university, I've kind of like kept up with psychology, like as an amateur, a psychology enthusiast, I guess. But no, the neuro aspect came a bit later.
Well, let's dive into that then, Adell, because one of the unique things that you do is that you combine functional neurology with yoga. So let's just get these definitions out. We know what yoga is, but can you explain what functional neurology is, please?
My definition is just taking what we know about the brain and how the brain, different areas of the brain affects how we move specifically, but also how we feel pain, how we feel different sensations, how we interpret different external input coming into the body, or as well as a little bit of psychology, but taking everything that we know about it and applying it to yoga in my case. Or I suppose to keep it more general, applying it to a functional everyday life existence.
So it gives us an idea of how you integrate that into your practice and your teaching.
Sure. So one of my favorite things is to bring what we know about the vestibular system into a yoga asana practice. So the vestibular system is also known as the inner ear. It's basically what tells your brain what direction you're going in and which way is up. And it's super basic, right? Like super basic, but so important. It's like anything else that's really, really basic and kind of primal. And, it's like, well, wow, it's almost one of those things, like it seems so basic. And that for me, it was like, oh, wow, there's an area of the brain that has to do that, But obviously, for that same reason, if you can imagine a life where that's not quite working properly, you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of discomfort and pain and issues. So so there's lots of different things that we can do to help balance, I guess, the vestibular system, because a lot of people are living with mild imbalances. Some people are living with major imbalances. If you have a major issue with the vestibular system, you'll probably know about it. But with the minor ones, you may not be able to pinpoint that some little issue that you've got is because your brain, as you move through life, doesn't quite know exactly which way is up. And maybe your head is slightly tilted to the left, and because what feels like up for you isn't actually up. And so your brain is getting like mismatched input from between your eyes and your body versus what your vestibular system tells it. And so it's very powerful to work with the vestibular system. And actually, like anything, it can be very complex, but it can also, like in a general sense, it can be quite simple to do some simple exercises. So I like to bring the vestibular system into my asana teachings, whether that's like a drill where you kind of move your head in a funny little way, but also sometimes it's doing things that people wouldn't even know as a vestibular drill, but just getting people to move in different directions to what we normally do. So for example, as we go through everyday life, most of us, we do a lot of like walking forwards, right? And we maybe move up and down. So those areas of the vestibular system are well trained. We're used to moving in those ways. But how often do we move backwards? How often do we move sideways or twist? How often do we hold our head sideways and then look up or whatever? And so those are the areas of the vestibular system where it's maybe a little bit weak. If we think of it like a muscle that you don't train very much is going to be weak, right? So I like to strengthen those muscles, if you will, of the vestibular system, just knowing that. And anybody listening, you can do this just as a little experiment. It's quite interesting. If you just type into Google, like vestibular system function and then any kind of issue, hormonal issues, anxiety, depression, chronic pain, like just literally anything, I bet you will find studies that have linked that issue with problems with the vestibular system. Like that's how powerful it is that it almost touches every aspect of our lives.
Well, this is fascinating. So let's just pause for a second. Can you explain then the overall concept of what you call neuro yoga? And then if I might, let's just say, I don't want to use the word normal because there's no such thing as normal. If I'm a yoga practitioner, how would that benefit me then? So tell us about neuro yoga, and then tell me how that might benefit me as a yoga instructor.
For sure. So I like to think of it in two parts. So the first part being that yoga already does a tremendous amount of good for the nervous system. So the nervous system just being your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, as well as your peripheral nervous system, all of the nerves branching out from your spinal cord. Because we know things like, yoga uses a certain type of breath. Typically in asana, you're just encouraged to breathe through your nose in slow, full breaths, none of the short, shallow breathing that we might fall into in everyday life, right? You typically are going to feel a place in a sense of safety and calm in a yoga practice just because of the elements of yoga. If you go to a yoga studio, typically you're going to walk in, the environment is going to feel very calm. It's, there's going to be relaxing music, maybe some nice aromatherapy. The space isn't cluttered or too busy, right? So all of these things already put our nervous system into this place of calm. And the asana as well. Like in yoga, it's not like cycling or running or so many sports or exercise modalities that kind of, you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? Like in yoga, we forward fold and back bend and twist and side bend, and we go upside down and we're holding ourselves sideways. And so we already do a lot of movement that that does stimulate these different areas of the brain. We're balancing on one foot, we're balancing on our hands, like, and all of these things require more areas of the brain to light up to do the jobs of coordinating and balancing us than a lot of other things, and certainly a lot more than just sitting on our butts at a desk all day, right? So that's one aspect of it, is kind of like recognizing like, okay, well, what am I already doing with yoga? Because when you understand like what you're already doing that helps the nervous system, then you can kind of be a little bit more controlled with it, right? And intentional with it. So I like to kind of start there with people. But then, of course, the second part of it is bringing in a little bit more of that like weird stuff, right? The stuff that's not normal, we can put that in air quotes, because what is normal? And so that would be like the vestibular drills that I was talking about, or using more of the visual system. For example, like what we do with our eyes. Our eyes, I mean, there's lots of different ways that we can bring the visual system into it, but just as an example, where your eyes go, your body follows. And we can use that to help with getting deeper ranges of motion, for example. I also like to work with the nerves. So, you know, we know that we're working with the muscles and fascia, like the fascial system has gotten so much of the limelight, I feel like, over the years, especially in the yoga world. But very often what we're doing when we stretch, and a lot of the stretches is we're not working with muscles, we're working with nerves. And a lot of people don't even realize like the sensations that they're feeling are not muscles stretching, they're nerves stretching. So just kind of like building the awareness and the knowledge around the differences between working with muscles and fascia versus working with the peripheral nerves. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on. But
this is
that's
really
kind of the
interesting.
gist of it.
If we go back, if I'm an instructor and I've gone through your neuro yoga, see if I've got it in my very logical, male, non-yoga orientated brain, but let's see if I've got this right, is that I can give purpose to, okay, we're doing these movements for these reasons. The reason why your eyes are doing this is going to have this effect on your brain. The reason why, so I can stand it. So instead of just explaining what to do, I'm explaining why. I'm explaining the effect. Have I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about, for me, I think of the yoga practice as a way to prepare you to deal with like the world out there, right? A little bit better, whether that's like your mindset, how you control your emotions or just approach your emotions, as well as how you feel in your body. So, yeah, it's just helping train people for that everyday life existence a little bit better.
No, I can imagine being in a class though, and the instructor is saying to me, you know, this is the movement, etc. Yes, coaching me to get into the right movement, but then say the purpose behind this is going to do that. I think that's a really nice enhancement. That's a nice enhancement and powerful to what I've seen in the 2 yoga classes I've ever been to.
Yeah. It's, I mean, every teacher is different. I know that, and sometimes, you know, it just depends what you want to get out of the yoga practice. But I know for a lot of us, yes, we like information. And in fact,
Yeah,
like that's kind of one of those like aspect, like neurology 101 is like your brain just wants to feel safe. And when we have more information, our brain feels safer. So I'm
Oh, I like
with
that.
you. I
Your
like
brain
to kind
wants
of
to
know
feel
the
safe.
why and the how
Yeah,
behind things.
I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
I read that you've got a specific methodology called MWA, if I've got that right. Can you just explain what that methodology is, please?
That's just, that stands for Move with Adell, which is what I named my app because I couldn't think of anything better. But I don't know. I thought it could be like mwah, like you're blowing a kiss, but that hasn't really stuck. Which is entirely my fault because I've never really tried to put it out there like that. But it's just based on my personal practice where I if I've got something that I'm working towards, then I weave little drills for that thing into a little sequence, like a sun salutation, like to just take a good old sun salutation, which is just a very sort of tried and tested sequence that is seen across many modalities of yoga asana, and then weave in the drills and then just do that over and over and over again. And so that's what I share. Or there's just these short flows that are like between 10 to 20 minutes typically, and they start and they finish in the same position. And so the idea is that, let's say it's a 15-minute flow, you've only got 15 minutes, so you just do it once. Cool. You moved your body for 15 minutes. Awesome. But if you've got 30 minutes, then you can do it a second time. And when you do it a second time, because I bring neurology into it, and I'm always thinking about all of these different things going on with your brain. And remember, I only grazed the surface earlier. Like there's so much more that I didn't talk about that I would love to talk about. But yeah, so the sequence is very often going to feel quite weird and unusual and unfamiliar. And so the idea is that you do it 2 times, maybe 3 times if you've got 45 minutes to move, and you start to feel it more in your body with every repetition. So then you get the benefit of the variety of moving in novel ways, as well as the repetition, that repetition builds mastery kind of notion. And that's basically it.
So I know you offer a training course called Creative Sequencing. Is this what you're talking about now? And if so, how does that creative sequencing actually benefit the brain and body? You can get a bit more granular. Please tell us.
For sure. So, well, it's called the Brain-Based Creative Sequencing course, and I created it because I had originally put out just a normal like creative sequencing course, because before I started learning about neurology, I was interested in creative sequencing, but I just liked it for the sake of it. I just liked being creative. It was my creative outlet. But then as I started learning about neurology, I was like, oh, wow, the brain likes this. This is actually this is tied so well into what I'm learning about functional neurology from a movement point of view. And because you've probably heard of like neuroplasticity, right? Like we learn new things, and the brain is able to change every time we do something different. And if you do the same thing over and over and over again, then you get really good at that, but you also get worse at the things that you're not doing. And so from a functional perspective, if we have more pathways that feel familiar for us in the ways that we move, then we're going to be more resilient in everyday life. Because just to make it super basic, if you only if every time you need to reach your arm up overhead, you bring your arm straight out in front of you, and you never bring it out to the side or at an angle, it's always just straight out in front of you, then in some part of your life, like one day, if you need to, for whatever reason, you cannot bring your arm straight out in front of you, and you need to bring your arm out to the side, it's going to feel really weak. It's going to feel really uncomfortable and unfamiliar. And you might even risk injury, right? I mean, that's not the best example, but the idea is that the more ways you move, the more ways you can move with confidence and with strength and with coordination. And so that's kind of the starting point of my creative sequencing, is just the idea of novelty and variety, bringing more activation to more areas of the brain and creating more of these pathways. But then I also go into primarily an area of the brain called the cerebellum, which is a super important and super fascinating area of the brain because it does so many things. But when it comes to movement, it's really hugely responsible for a lot of our reflexive stability. And what that means is the way that we can still hold ourselves up even when we're not thinking about holding ourselves up. Like if you reach your arm out to grab something, like say you're grabbing your coffee from your barista, you're only thinking about reaching your arm out. But what you're not thinking about that's actually happening on a very high level in the brain is that there's all of these muscles stabilizing through your core to prevent you from falling over now that your arm is reaching out, right? And so the cerebellum plays a really big role in that. It also plays a really big role in balance, as you can imagine. The cerebellum is also super important. It plays a huge role in correcting mistakes. So it's where we learn from mistakes. And this is so, so important, especially for adults, because we don't like to make mistakes. We like to just feel like we can do everything perfectly the first time. But whenever we can like wobble in a balance, for example, that really lights up the cerebellum. And so the cerebellum is sending messages to other areas of the brain, like, hey, can we do this differently next time? Like, that wasn't quite right. And the same thing with coordination. So doing like several complex movements at once, you're probably going to make mistakes the first few times. That's awesome. That means the cerebellum is going like, oh, that wasn't quite right. Let's change it next time. Accuracy. So being able to, like, okay, horrible example, but let's say you want to pick your nose. You don't want to like poke your eye, right? You want to be able to like accurately get your finger in your nostril. Like I said, horrible example, but that's thanks to the cerebellum that you can accurately stick your finger in your nostril and not poke yourself in the eye. And so that's what I like to go into in the brain-based creative sequencing course. It acts as a nice foundation to my teacher training, because it starts off with elements like this, and just giving people an opportunity to start to play with weaving some of the things that they learn from me about these areas of the brain into your typical yoga asana sequences.
So if you were giving yoga instructors one piece of advice to help them create their own creative sequences, what would you say to them?
Oh, it depends. It depends on where they're starting out, because I think what a lot of people struggle with when it comes to creative sequencing is just that starting point of, how do I break out of my habits? How do I get into the mindset of like doing things that I'm not used to doing? And so my number one tool that I share in the course, like it's like the number one thing, is just become aware of how you move habitually, like what feels familiar, what is your default, and do anything but that. And so, like, let's go back to the example that I used before of reaching your arms up overhead. Very often, that's a very common yoga movement. Like at the beginning of a sun salutation, if you will, you reach your arms up overhead. So let's say you've always only reached your arms straight up overhead, and occasionally you bring them out to the side. Well, what can you do besides that? Maybe you sweep your arms back behind you instead, right? It could be as tiny as that. It could be even tinier. It could be like, maybe you hold your hands in tight fists instead of having your palms open. Like literally anything to change it up. So that would be my starting point, is just become aware of the things that you do habitually and do anything but that.
That's great advice. So switching gears a little bit, you have a huge online presence. Firstly, congratulations. But what I'm really interested to hear is, how do you maintain a sense of community and connection with your students being all virtual?
Oh, I don't know if I'm oversimplifying this, but to me, it's always just felt really simple. I just respond to my comments and my DMs and my emails, and I encourage people to reach out to me. I sign every one of my newsletters. Like, if you have any questions, please hit reply. I love hearing from you, because I do genuinely love hearing from people. Like, I don't ignore people. That's
Simple
about it.
as that. But
Yeah.
it's complicated. It's, it's energy, it's presence, it's enthusiasm, it's consistency. So that, although it sounds easy, it takes a lot
But
more.
I guess I love it, and especially because, like whenever I do get to travel somewhere and I get to meet somebody and they come up to me and they're like, oh my gosh, I've been following you for like 5 years. And I remember like maybe some of the things that they sent me in a message. It's like, wow, like, yes, this like proof, like this is a human being, because it is so easy, isn't it, to kind of forget that we're talking to like fellow human beings, but not just like a fellow human being, but like a really cool human being. And you're like, oh my gosh, we should be friends. I really like you. And and I think I'm just lucky. Maybe I feel like almost everybody in my DMs, not everybody, but almost everybody in my DMs is like a really cool person. And I'm like, yeah, I want to talk to you. I want to take the time to message you.
Yeah, I love that. So how did you grow such an online presence? I'm sure it's some of what we just talked about, but do you have any other tips for people?
Oh God, no, don't take tips from me. Uh, I grew, I skyrocketed. I was getting like so many followers every single day, way back like 2018, 2019, 2020. Since then yeah, like Instagram at least has been pretty stagnant. And so, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong in all honesty, but, at the beginning, I mean, I think a lot of it was luck and the way the algorithm worked. It must have been. But I did find that doing tutorials, like teaching people, like, hey, if you're doing this, that's not helpful, try this instead. Those were very helpful for my growth.
Yeah, bits of
People like
value
to
that you're
learn.
offering. For sure. For sure. So actually, another question kind of along those lines, what challenges and rewards have you encountered offering these online courses and workshops to people?
Definitely hugely rewarding because, I mean, I think it's something that we all kind of experienced during, like, when the pandemic hit and we had to do everything online. It was like, oh wow, I can reach people, on every corner of the earth with this. Like, because before that I was traveling. I was like, okay, I'm going to go teach in Vienna. Now I'm going to go teach in Barcelona. Now I'm going to go teach in Singapore. And then it was like, oh, I can just like put a little thing online and reach everybody all at once. This is cool. And I love online learning myself, and I love offering it because, for me, it's really important to be able to pause, to be able to play, if you're listening to somebody that speaks really slowly, like speed them up a bit, or just go back and watch a video like 4 times because you're like, I think I get it, but I'm not quite fully there. But you just don't get those in person.
Sure.
But then, of course, I mean, I'm not going to say anything profound here. I think anybody can guess what I'm going to say. Like, doing everything online, you miss that in-person connection. Like, we are human beings. We are animals. Like, we have biology and we are emotional beings. Like, we need that connection. And I feel really, really lucky that I've got a nice balance now. Because there was one point when I was just doing everything online and I was like, oh my God, I need to see some other humans. So yeah, and it's a good way to learn as well. I will say that actually, like, sometimes, like, if I go too long without doing something in person, then I'm a little bit stuck in, like, I forget, like, where people, like, what level most people are at, and I'm there teaching, like, all right, jump to handstand, hold your handstand for 10 seconds. No, I would never do that. I'm exaggerating, but, like,
Andy can do that. Yeah.
Sure.
Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, people struggle with this posture that I forgot is actually not super simple.
Sure.
So that's another benefit.
Yeah. So I have one more online question before we move on. Your website is really beautiful and it's clear in its substance.
Thank you.
How did you build it over time? And can you offer any advice for others looking to develop their own in the same manner?
Do you mean the Move with Adell site?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay. Because I have another website that badly needs updating. But Move with Adell, it's been a labor of love. I did call it like my baby. I told everybody I'm having a baby, and I've treated it like a child. And it's been a lot of work, but it depends on it does depend on, like, how many people you can count on subscribing, because the platform that I use is really expensive. So, like, a lot of yoga teachers, like, if they're only going to get like maybe 50 people signing up, like, I wouldn't recommend what I use because they would just be in the hole. But there's so many other ways that you can do it. Like, you don't need something like, I use Uscreen. You don't need something like that. Like, you can absolutely just, like, record your own videos and stick them on YouTube, like, unlisted, and then embed that into your website, for example. Like, there's definitely lots of different creative ways that you can kind of create your own online membership. And I think it's always worth a try. I encourage anybody that is thinking about creating more of an online studio to at least give it a try. Like, it is a lot of work, and it's a whole different skill set to record classes for online without having like actual students there, and all you're talking to is like your camera. But it can be, yeah, it can be a nice, I don't want to say passive income, because that suggests that you don't do anything and it is a lot of work, but it's like you can create a video, or let's say like an online course, and still like 2 years later, people are buying it and you're making a little bit of money from it. So that, I would say that's the biggest benefit, really.
Sure.
And it's convenient for people who want to learn from you and aren't able to meet you in person or on a live thing.
For sure. For sure. So your passion and your zest for yoga and life clearly come through in our conversation. It's really fun to talk to you, actually. How do you continue to evolve and deepen your own practice amidst all the teaching and coaching and everything we've been talking about?
Oh, I like to kind of keep myself, I always have some goal that I'm working on, first of all. If I don't have something that I'm really excited to work on, something that like requires me to push into discomfort and like be humbled and all of this, then I do start to feel stagnant. And then the same goes with learning. Like I always have some course or training or something that I'm doing, and I invest in it. I'll invest a lot of money in it, because if I invest a lot of money into something, then it makes me really want to keep, actually go and watch those videos or whatever. So I find that like, as long as I'm still like meeting with people in person and seeing kind of like what they're struggling with, and I've got my own goals that I'm working on, and then I can apply what I learn from whatever course I'm working my way through to my own goals, and then what I'm teaching others, then those three things in combination mean that I just never run out of inspiration or ideas or motivation.
Yeah. Living a life of curiosity and that accountability piece seem like they shine through there with what you said.
Curiosity and never allowing myself to get too comfortable for too long.
Sure.
It's interesting because one of the things I find when we talk to a lot of people who are new into ALWELLCO in the community is any subject is making that first step is always the hardest. So for individuals who are new to yoga or movement practices, what sort of foundational advice would you help them to make that first step or get started?
Definitely get rid of any kind of notion that your yoga practice has to be any certain length. A lot of people get caught up in this idea that like you have to practice for a whole hour. And don't get me wrong, like that's great. Like you can really like feel a lot more, and really get a lot more out of the practice if you can practice for longer than an hour, for sure. Like a good 2-hour session, you can do the breath work, you can like really take the time, like, but just being realistic, like if you're like, oh, I have to set aside an hour, then it's just too easy to be like, well, I'll do it tomorrow, and then repeat that for inevitably, and then 10 years go by and you're like, I've always wanted to start yoga. Just do 10 minutes. Do 10 minutes. Do 5 minutes. Just stand on, like, if you don't have a yoga mat, just stand in your living room. Or if you do have a yoga mat, stand on your yoga mat. And don't let yourself move off of that yoga mat for 60 seconds, like if that's what it takes. And at least you can say, I stood on my yoga mat for a whole minute today. Like, just, you can always break it down to a smaller interval that is manageable. So find that amount of time, and then you can apply, maybe if time isn't an issue for you, maybe it's like the intensity, maybe it's whatever, like, but find the interval or whatever level of that change that needs to take place. Just find that point where you're like, okay, this is manageable, I can work with this, and go from there.
Okay, so I got that in terms of being a yoga participant. But I'm a huge, keen yoga participant. I do an hour every day, and I really want to give it a go to be an instructor, but I'm frightened. I don't know how to make that first step. Come on, how do I make that first step? What do I do?
Oh, I would say have a go at teaching some of your friends or family like a little bit of yoga. Like maybe there's like an arm balance that you've recently been able to unlock. And so you're like, let me see how it goes if I like try and teach my brother this arm balance or whatever. Um, and see how you like it. But also remember, like, yoga teacher trainings are so many people do them to deepen their practice. They like me, like they go into it not intending to ever teach. So it can just be a nice place to start anyway. Just do a teacher training just without the intention of having to become a teacher, but just to go and learn a bit more.
Yeah. So what common misconceptions do you encounter about yoga, and how do you address them? Because I'm sure there are a lot of doubters out there about the benefits of yoga, and what are some of the misconceptions?
So many. Obviously, the biggest one is that you have to be flexible. I can't believe that it's still out there. I cannot believe that I still hear people saying like, "Oh, I want to do yoga, but I'm not flexible." Like that's like saying I'm too hungry to eat. Like, or like if you become flexible by practicing yoga.
That's a really good. That's a great analogy. I like that.
Yeah, it's just it's nonsensical. But then also I think a lot of people don't realize that yoga can be really hard. They think that it's going to be boring. They think that it's just, not going to do much for them. But you can actually build up a lot of strength by working. And I mean, it depends on the style of yoga that you go to, but it can make you very strong and it can be quite a workout.
For sure. I remember the first time I did yoga, it was I was in college playing volleyball, and this was our rest day, right? This was our off day. We were allowed to do yoga for an hour with the instructor. Oh my gosh, we left that room and we were more tired than we had been in the weight room. We had this in our head that, oh, is this going to be stretching? We're going to get to lay on the ground. Absolutely not. I mean, the practice we did that day was pretty intense, and it changed my mind about yoga forever. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was with my physical therapist last night. I've got a bit of a shoulder issue going on, and he said, "I'm sure when you've done some of your yoga, etc., you've done some of these moves or poses before." And I joked with him that I'd done 2 yoga classes before, and he put me into like a bear type position, and all I had to do was on all fours. I just had to take one of my legs off and hold it for 2 seconds. My core went on fire. So I'm completely behind the fact that yoga is tough. It's hard work. And I was only doing a bear balance pose with one leg off the floor for 2 seconds. So very, very interesting.
Yeah, and it's like anything, it gets easier with time as well. Like probably if you go to like 10 more yoga classes in the next month, then that bear pose, I don't know what bear pose is, by the way, but whatever. You'll be like, oh, this is so easy now. So
yeah, obviously
it's just doing
it's a
new
physical
things.
therapy move, and no, you
I think
probably got a
Yoga will
different
help
name.
you.
You probably got a different name, different name for it anyway. So, okay, are there any upcoming projects or courses you're developing that you want to share with the audience? This is the time to plug yourself, please. And what are your aspirations for the future of yoga and movement education?
Oh, aspirations for the future. I quite I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, really. I just want to keep inspiring and helping people to feel empowered in their own bodies. Like that's what everything for me comes down to, is just empowerment, because I feel like we live in a society where we're constantly taught that, we can't trust our bodies, or we can't rely on ourselves, and we need some product, some external thing. And actually, our bodies are our gurus. And So I just want to keep doing that. Upcoming things, last year I ran 3 handstand and yoga retreats, and they were all like a big success. And so I'm going to keep doing that because I figure why not? It's lots of fun. And so I've got one coming up in March in Morocco. I'll continue running my teacher training for yoga teachers that want to learn how to bring functional neurology into their teachings. And I haven't said this to anybody actually out loud yet, but I am thinking that I'm going to take one of the modules from that teacher training and just make it into a standalone course. So that would be on like nerve mobilizations, which is a really cool way to kind of deal with pain and get greater range of motion and that sort of thing.
Very cool. Well, we will obviously put that in the notes for the podcast and let people know where to find you and how to come and do the retreat or the courses.
Cool.
I think you're probably aware that the basis of our podcast in ALWELLCO is it's about strength. You've shown lots of strength. It's about your unique perspective, which is fantastic today. You've given us the whole ideas of what you believe and what you like to teach. But our other pillar is kindness, and I think the world needs kindness at any time. So we always like you to give a plug to someone who embodies those values for you, someone who's influenced you, someone's inspired you on your journey. So this is a time to give someone else a shout out, please.
Oh, for sure. I think I would have to give the shout out to Dr. Eric Cobb, who heads up Z Health Performance. That's where I've learned the majority of my functional neurology stuff. It's absolutely changed my life, changed how I look at everything, obviously changed how I practice and teach yoga. So yeah, he's an absolute genius, and his courses I would recommend to anybody that's interested in just applying some of that functional neurology to whatever it is that they do.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.